Hey everybody, welcome back to the Golden Bolt. This week we're going to be tackling another game in our Too Many Games suggestion marathon. But first, I want to give you a little bit of backstory. See, at Too Many Games this year, on top of my friends suggesting a bunch of games for me to review, and me utterly, very much regretting that decision, I met 4 specific YouTubers who had inspired my channel format and inspired me to create content in general, and I asked them what kind of game they would like to see me, as a fan of theirs, to review. And this week we're going to be tackling Brave Fencer Musashi, which is suggested by Some Call Me Johnny. If you're familiar with my channel, you're probably familiar with his channel. If not, go watch his stuff. It's excellent. Now, the most I knew about Brave Fencer Musashi before this review was that it was a very beloved cult classic from the late PS1 era. Does it deserve that cult status, though? I don't know. Let's find out. Brave Fencer Musashi was first envisioned by the creator of Final Fantasy, Hironobu Sakaguchi, in early 1997. Designed with a heavy action focus rather than as a traditional JRPG, Musashi was a stark contrast from the previous Square games. So much so that Sakaguchi wasn't sure how well the game would perform. It was only after seeing the game start to come together with its unique art and gameplay styles that Sakaguchi felt confident in the project. However, there was still the issue of North America. This was a game initially based off a famous Japanese samurai, Miyamoto Musashi. The Western audiences wouldn't know that, and in a stiff 1998 market where the entire world was waiting patiently for Ocarina of Time, there had to be an equalizer. That equalizer was this, a packed-in demo of Final Fantasy VIII. Now, say what you will about Final Fantasy VIII from a modern standpoint, I know it's not the most popular game anymore, but at the time, coming hot off the heels of Final Fantasy VII, this was a big deal, and it gave Musashi a real chance to compete with this game. Not a huge chance, mind you. Musashi also had to compete with Metal Gear Solid, Spyro the Dragon, Crash 3, and the first Pokemon games. You can take a guess where this is going. The game performed quite well in Japan, all things considered, but only moved 250,000 units stateside. That's not bad at all for a sort of side project, but there's a reason this game isn't well remembered nowadays. The game starts off in a palace in the All-You-Can-Eat Kingdom, where we learn that the kingdom is being attacked by the Thirst Quencher Empire. The Thirst Quencher Empire is searching for the legendary Sword of Luminescence, Lumina, located just behind the All-You-Can-Eat Palace. The kingdom's princess, Filet, performs a summoning ritual to bring forth the legendary hero that once held Lumina, Brave Fencer Musashi. However, instead of the legendary hero, we get this kid, who's also named Musashi. Everybody is confused for a moment, but then they figure, it's worth a shot, and they send Musashi to go find Lumina. Once he finds Lumina, Musashi can begin finding 5 elemental scrolls to help save the All-You-Can-Eat Kingdom. Only then can he return home to his realm. Before Musashi leaves, the butler gives him another sword, Fusion, and from here the journey begins. Musashi retrieves Lumina, but by the time he returns to the castle, Rutrick, one of the leaders of the Thirst Quencher Empire, kidnaps Princess Filet. Musashi chases after Rutrick to no avail, and then saves the nearby Grillin village from one of the Thirst Quencher machines before passing out from exhaustion. He wakes up in the palace, where the butler explains some bad news. Not only has the princess been taken away, but 35 other people from the palace were trapped in these green diamonds called Bincho Fields and hidden across the kingdom. Let me guess, Musashi now has to save the princess on top of finding the 5 scrolls, right?
Thou art beest corrected.
On top of that, he's encouraged to save the people trapped in the Bincho Fields, as only Lumina can break through Bincho energy. And he's told he should try and find the pieces to the fabled legendary armor worn by the original Musashi. That's a pretty hefty journey to be thrown on some kid, but Musashi seems up to the task. There are 5 chapters in the game, not counting the short introductory chapter. Each one is focused around finding one elemental scroll and then unlocking its power by defeating the Crest Guardian for each element. The elements are Earth, Water, Fire, Wind, and Sky? What? Whatever. The plot is very formulaic in approach, although the actual details vary a bit from chapter to chapter. Generally, though, you complete a bunch of filler objectives for the village, and then Musashi just sort of stumbles into the scroll before further stumbling onto the Crest Guardian for that scroll and then defeating it. Let me just touch on that filler comment for one moment. In the first chapter, there are no fewer than 9 different tasks you must complete one by one before you can obtain the Earth Scroll. In another chapter, you become the interim mayor because the mayor is sick. So you go and do all the errands he didn't feel like doing before putting out a fire that breaks out in the village, at which point he, and I quote, forgets about his cold. My point is, this game has a lot of filler. Early on, the story pacing slows to a crawl because the first couple hours is just doing fetch quests like saving a dog or cutting down trees to make a raft. But later in the game, the chapters are almost blink and you'll miss it fast with just as little substance to them. It's wildly inconsistent, and while I do appreciate that the later chapters are shorter, the rapid-fire nature of these chapters comes off almost as lazily as front-loading a bunch of filler early on. I would have much preferred things to be evened out a bit so that the plot feels less contrived as a whole. This laziness is even more present at times in the characters. Now, I want to note that the characters by and large are fantastic in this game. This is one of the funniest games I have played in years. Stuart Ribson constantly addingeth the medieval inflection to his words always madeth me laugheth, and giving every character a food-themed pun for a name made me actively look forward to finding the Bincho fields. This guy's name is Pianissimete. That's friggin' amazing. But the major players are almost without fail introduced out of nowhere and then never seen for several hours. There are no fewer than 8 people that you're introduced to in the Thirst Quencher Empire. Fuhrer Flatsky, Rutrick, Capricola, Ginger Ale, Bubbles, and the leader's force of Topo, Ed, and Ben. They're introduced so sporadically that none of them ever feel important. You see all but one of these people maybe 3 times each, and 2 of them just disappear at one point, never to be mentioned again. Why even add that many characters if you're not going to remotely flesh them out? It's even worse about halfway into the game because we're introduced to Musashi's rival, Kojiro, who shows up exactly twice and isn't important in either scene. Why would you introduce a rival character if you're just gonna brush him aside immediately? That just cheapens the experience to me. With characters, it should be quality over quantity. The characters we do get to see for more than a few moments are always great though. Take John for example, voiced by Steve Bloom. When you meet him near the beginning of the game, he's locked up in a stockade. You're not told why, you're just kinda left to wonder, but you free him anyway. Then he tells you this insane story about how riding a raft down Twin Peak Mountain will lead you to a piece of the legendary armor, and against his better judgment, Musashi listens to him, and lo and behold, he's right. He always seems sketchy, but he always leads you in the right direction, no matter how cautious you may be about him. Plus, he's got a dog named Leno. He may not appear all that often, but he doesn't feel shoehorned in like the Thirst Quencher goons do. The rest of the townspeople are all unique and interesting, and since they're always around, you can get an easy idea of their personalities. Anyway, to get back to the plot, it's time for the spoiler warning. I'm gonna run through the ending of the game, so if you don't want the final chapter to be spoiled for you, you can go ahead and click right here. Once you collect 4 of the 5 scrolls, John comes back and gives you a note with an idea of where to go to find the final scroll, Sky. After retrieving the Sky Scroll, the Thirst Quencher Empire's base ship thingy attacks Musashi and he climbs his way aboard. He fights his way through the leader's force, defeating Ed and Ben in combat, and he kills Topo by outdancing her. What? Then he defeats the final Crest Guardian, completing Lumina. This is when Flatsky comes in. He orders Musashi to give him Lumina or else he'll kill the princess, at which point he orders his right-hand man, Capricola, to kill Musashi. And then...
Ever since you killed my parents!
Wait, what? Where did this come from? Yeah, I avoided telling you that Steve Bloom also voiced Capricola because, surprise, John and Capricola are the same person. John was the crown prince of the Thirst Quencher Empire before Flatsky killed his parents and took over. Now he's going to exact his revenge after giving a long-winded speech and he got shot.
Take care of Leno for me.
I will, John. I will. Musashi trades Lumina for the princess, and Flatsky opens up the final seal, revealing that there's a dark wizard imprisoned inside Lumina. And by wizard, I mean that that's clearly the devil. All of this is coming out of nowhere. There's a single line at the beginning of the game that mentions the Dark Wizard, which I guess was our cue to realize that he'd make an appearance. Turns out that everybody was told through the legend that the wizard was sealed by Lumina, when in reality the original Musashi sealed the wizard within Lumina. That's kind of important. You'd think somebody would have written that one down in bold or something. Anyway, the wizard crushes Flatsky because of course he does, he's Satan, and then comes after Musashi and the princess. Not before Lumina comes back to Musashi though. Also, where did Rutrick go? While running away from the wizard, Musashi runs into his rival Kojiro, who somehow kidnapped the princess again. Kojiro demands a fight, however the wizard catches up, and for some reason Kojiro fuses with him out of nowhere, turning him into a giant reptile. What I wouldn't give to be a fly on the wall for that translation team. Legend has it that Musashi sealed away the dark lizard? That's not right. Dark wizard. Oh my god, it's actually a lizard. That's it, I'm done. I'm going to Nintendo. They offered me a job translating this game. It's called Mother 3, should be out in a couple years. Musashi fights the Dark Lizard and eventually defeats it, sealing it back inside Lumina once and for all. We get a little ending scene where the princess talks to her parents who just got back from vacation. Wait, they went on an 82-day vacation? Jeez. Musashi goes to return Lumina and that's it? What about him going back to his realm? What about Leno? Who's gonna run the Thirst Quencher Empire now that Satan destroyed half of it and both the current and previous leaders are dead? Where's the closure on anything here? This might be one of the most half-assed plots I can recall in some time, and that's a huge shame considering I love a lot about this game's storytelling. The villagers are unique and well written, the game's funny as all hell, and there's so much promise here. But they left so many threads open that I don't even know if I could call this a fully woven story. It's more like a half-stitched 100-year-old quilt with holes all over the place. It's even more heinous because this is a game coming from Square, a company that was on top of the world at this point, at least in part due to its storytelling. For every bit of charm it has, it's got two problems outweighing each positive. For every good character, there's a character that the writers just completely forgot about at some point. Imagine if halfway through Star Fox, Falco just flew away, never to be seen again. That's pretty much what this game does on a regular basis. I want to like this game's story, but there are so many flaws that I just can't give it a good score here. For that reason, the story of Brave Fencer Musashi is getting a bronze bolt. Musashi is an action RPG with a heavy focus on the action elements. Our hero wields two very different swords with two very different power sets, Fusion and Lumina. Fusion is a smaller, faster sword good for quick attacks, while Lumina is a heftier beast that takes a little more time to swing around. The square button is used for fusion attacks and triangle is for Lumina attacks, with R1 as your block button. While blocking, this meter also charges up, and when it's full it unleashes the special powers of either sword. By pressing square when the meter is maxed, Musashi throws fusion like a boomerang. If it hits an enemy, the player can then mash square to fill the meter up with Bincho energy. If you don't get all the way to max, you just get some free Bincho energy to fill your BP meter. But if you do max it out, you'll absorb a special power granted by that enemy type. The different powers vary greatly from enemy to enemy, with some actually acting as a detriment to Musashi. Some of the fusion abilities will trip automatically, but for most you have to press circle to activate them. Each ability costs a set number of Bincho points to use though, so you have to keep an eye on the green BP meter right under your health bar. If instead of pressing square you press triangle while the meter is charged, you'll unleash one of Lumina's special attacks. There's one normal attack, a spin attack, and then one for each of the 5 scrolls. These abilities are usually more useful for puzzles than actual combat though. The earth power often stuns enemies, but it's mostly used for pressing heavy switches. Likewise, the water ability can damage some enemies with rapid fire bubbles, but it's mostly useful for crossing bodies of water because Musashi can't swim. So right there, this is already a really intriguing combo. A game focused heavily on sword fighting where you can absorb abilities just like Kirby? That sounds awesome! The problem comes when you actually think a bit deeper about the ability absorption. With enemies often punishing you for absorbing them by giving you a useless, or even worse, negative ability, it's instilled early on that you shouldn't really use Fusion's power. The easiest way to figure out what an enemy will do when absorbed is to just let it attack Musashi. That's counterintuitive. Why should I take a hit to learn that this ghost shrinks me down, just so I know that I have to absorb it to shrink down this guy? There's another time later on where I'm supposed to absorb this enemy to know that he has the throw ability, and then leave the room and come back and let him throw me up to the next platform. I can't help but feel this mechanic would have benefited greatly from something like Navi in Ocarina of Time. The ability to lock onto an enemy and learn what it does and what its copy ability is would have solved that problem right away. Besides that issue, the combat is fun. There are some bonus abilities you can learn from some of the villagers you save, and using these abilities actually gives you more experience. Speaking of experience, let's talk about the RPG part of this action RPG. There are actually only 4 stats you can earn experience for and level up. There's Body, which grows as you defeat enemies and buffs your attack strength. There's Mind, which increases as you walk around and lowers the amount of damage you take. And then there's Fusion and Lumina, which gives each respective weapon more damage output and racks up experience by using said weapons. Leveling up is satisfying, although it doesn't happen as often as I'd like. I had to grind from level 15 to 25 right before the final chapter simply because the game isn't balanced well enough for me to be a decent enough level at that point. Maybe I was just a really efficient player, but I rarely had to backtrack for Bincho fields or anything, so the game was mostly a straight shot for me. Usually I'm over-leveled in RPGs, so being 40% under-leveled was a surprise to me and made me question if it was the way I played the game or if it was the game itself that was at fault here. If you look at those stats though, you'll notice that there's no traditional stat for health or for Bincho energy. That's because these are earned based on your ability to find stuff. There are 35 Bincho fields hiding around the world map, and for each you find and hit with Lumina, your maximum BP will go up by 5, plus you'll be freeing another villager. Likewise, there are these elusive nocturnal creatures known as minkus that you can find throughout the map too. For each minku you catch, you'll find a longevity berry hiding in its mouth, which will up your max HP by 25. You can have a maximum of 500 for both your HP and your BP. Now, just because they're hiding doesn't mean they're necessarily hard to get. The Bincho fields are generally really easy to find, as your HUD will start blinking in red when you're in the same area as one, and it'll blink faster the closer you get. Minkus aren't as easy to spot, but if you go near where one would be during the daytime, you'll find some bright pink poo that it left behind as a present for you, which clues you in on where they may be. Now, I hear you asking, during the day? Yeah, this game has a day-night cycle, and in fact an entire week cycle. The shops in town are open specific hours each day, with some being closed on specific days, and some shops even have sales on certain days too. Even cooler, some items like bread will spoil over time if you don't use them, while others like cheese actually improve over time. However, as neat as it is, sadly there's almost no point to having this week cycle at all. In fact, all it ever did was hinder the experience, not enhance it. There's no easy way to fast forward time other than paying to sleep at the inn, which will only move you ahead in set increments. And while money isn't hard to earn, it's tough to justify spending thousands of dollars just because this one mission can only be started on a Friday between 7 AM and 12 PM. Even worse is that at certain points of the game, they actively mess around with some of the NPC schedules. Without warning, Windmill Guy stopped being nocturnal when I was taught for the previous 4 hours of gameplay that he was always asleep during the day. That's just there to mess with my enjoyment, there's no other reason for it. The absolute worst part of the day-night cycle, though, is Musashi's need to sleep. As time goes on, Musashi will get more and more exhausted, which at certain thresholds slows him down. The only way to battle this is to sleep at the inn or to use the sleep power and wait as Musashi gets some beauty rest. And wait. And wait. And if you don't, at a certain point Musashi will just fall asleep for you, no matter what you're doing or what's nearby. There is a legendary quote later on that speeds up sleeping a ton, but that's already about halfway into the game when Musashi gets it. By then we've already dealt with the irritating mechanics for several hours. The other status effect that Musashi can get is poison. Poison also slows Musashi down, and it slowly drains his health as well. The only way to cure poison is with an antidote, or by absorbing these cure snakes, which only appear in one specific area. This becomes a problem since you can only ever carry a max of 12 items, and even better, at least 1 or 2 of those inventory slots is always filled by quest items. That means feasibly you can only carry 2 or 3 antidotes on you at once, and the poisonous areas tend to have poisoned water instead of bottomless pits. You're going to spend a significant chunk of these areas poisoned, which isn't a health problem so much as a movement one. Considering that Square really loved their pixel-perfect platforming in this game, the lack of momentum you get from being poisoned can often be a problem. Don't get me wrong, the controls are usually really solid, but every so often they like to mess around with you, and when they do, it's infuriating. I've fallen off platforms into poison water many times because the game read the button press just too late. Anyway, let's talk about the miscellaneous stuff that I haven't mentioned yet. First, the legendary armor. There's stuff like a brace that lets you climb walls with your swords, a belt that gives you a second jump to help with platforming, and so on. These are cool, although most of them are really situational, but they do change Musashi's appearance as you find them, so that's cool. Backtracking gets a lot easier as you progress and gain new abilities like the water scrolls run on water. Some areas though are just needlessly tedious to explore before that, so it doesn't really even out to me. The boss fights are incredibly fun and really impressive considering that this is a PS1 game. There's a decent amount of optional stuff too, like these action figures you can buy of each enemy and character in the game, or the boss fight with the Mother Minku if you find all 13 Minkus beforehand. All this stuff is nice, although sometimes the flaws outweigh the benefits. Sadly, I have 2 more bad things to touch on. First, the game is really bad sometimes at giving you direction on where to go next. There are times where you have to wander around aimlessly and hope you find the right person to talk to, and keep in mind everybody comes out at different points during the day, or look up a guide to find out that, oh, I had to talk to the bakery girl because that's the first person I want to talk to about vampires. Now for the mini-games. From these time missions where you have to go turn valves to let steam off or else the whole village explodes, to these touchy rafting mini-games, to this Sonic 2 half-pipe mini-game where it's hard to see where you should dodge, they're all just a waste of time. The worst of all of those are the steam ones though, because you have an overall timer and a timer between valves. You try guessing which valve is the next one in order, having never been there before, in 35 seconds while waiting for this elevator which moves slowly up and down independently of you. You get so stressed waiting for the damn elevator, and then you have to jump on this pipe and hope you don't slip yet again. Son of a bitch. I hate to say it again, but this game has so much promise hidden behind such questionable design. There's so much that I thoroughly enjoy about Musashi's gameplay, but it's surrounded by so many problems that just pile on each other until I'm a big ball of anger. Designing a game to be intentionally tedious with powers that ease the tedium later isn't smart game design, and creating a core mechanic that can actively punish you isn't a good idea either. The actual gameplay is incredibly fun, but the stuff surrounding it way too often takes away from that fun instead of compounding it like it should. With a few simple tweaks, this could have been a great gameplay experience, but as it stands, with all the things that have me scratching my head, I have to give this game a bronze bolt for its gameplay as well. Let me say, for a PS1 game, Brave Fencer Musashi looks damn good. It's clear that a lot of time went into making this game a beauty, and boy does the game shine on this front. The characters are well designed, arguably some of the best designed character models the PS1's ever had. The enemy designs are unique and the animations are all really solid. Hell, with just the different fusion abilities alone, there are a ton of unique effects like shrinking enemies, going bowling with vampires as pins, and so on. And because the game is designed with a cartoony style, it holds up remarkably well. I'm not a graphics snob by any means, I can appreciate 8-bit just as much as 4K, but a lot of the PS1 era games just feel ugly to me nowadays because of the ugly character models and the flat textures. Musashi to me stands as one of, if not the best looking PS1 game out there. I never have any real issue with texture warping or graphical bugs here. The game tends to play out in a controlled 3D environment with a static camera angle, though it does tiptoe into a 2.5D angle at some points. The camera never causes me problems here, and both the 3D and 2.5D work incredibly well. In the village though, there's a fully controllable 3D camera that you can shift around by pressing the L2 or R2 buttons, which was a pleasant surprise. The overworld, while deceptively small, is quite varied, and there are mostly unique enemy types for each particular area. Steamwood in particular is just cool. I always love that nature versus machine vibe in games, and this game does a great job of making that whole area feel off-putting. The music is excellent in this game too. I can't think of a track I don't love. Each theme gives off a distinct feeling that not only matches the area in question, but enhances it. There are some areas I'd probably downright hate if not for the insanely catchy tune keeping me from losing my sanity. The first one that comes to mind is the Bincho Tight Mind theme, with its upbeat tempo and dark bass tones being counterbalanced by this addicting tag team of horns and guitar. I love it, and even at the worst moments of tedium in Musashi, I was still jamming out to some A+ music. And then there's the voice acting, which is surprisingly really common in this game. Even more surprisingly, it's really good. I can't think of many PS1 games period that have good voice acting, let alone games that run for 12 hours. There are a couple lines here and there that have that token, choppy delivery that games of this era had, but almost every performance stands out, and the lines that could have been better are a huge minority here. I honestly think that this game might be both the best looking and best sounding game on the PS1, and because of that, I'm giving Brave Fencer Musashi a golden bolt for its presentation, and even that might be underselling it. It is a crime that a game this damn charming has so many underlying problems. I can't stress enough that I like this game more than this review lets on. I don't know what it is that grabbed me, but I still had fun most of the time I was playing it, even when there were so many glaring problems distracting and infuriating me. I think this might be a game that thrives on its second playthrough, when you know where to go and what to avoid, but even then, the choppy pacing and back and forth fetch questing you often have to do will still bring the game down from what it could have been. That said, I still think that you should give this game a shot. It's just got that undefinable it factor that kept me coming back even though there were a ton of clear-cut flaws. It's going to be a game that angers you at some point because of how many mixed messages it sends, but I still think it's a game that any PS1 fan should experience once. The problem's gonna come if you want to buy the game. For some reason, it is still not available on the US or European PSN stores, so unless you can read Japanese, you're gonna need to buy a physical copy. Those can run anywhere from $30 to $50 depending on the condition of the case and if it has the demo disc included. Even at its worst moments, I would say the game is worth at least $30, so if you see it somewhere around or online, don't hesitate just because I personally have problems with it. Alright guys, that is it for Brave Fencer Musashi. I want to thank Some Call Me Johnny again for suggesting the game and for inspiring this channel to exist in the first place. I don't know why I'm looking over there, that's just my wall, but that is my YouTube channel right there. So subscribe. That's not going in. That said, we're going to move right on. We're not doing another YouTuber game next week, we're doing one of my friends' games, and that is Magical Mirror, starring Mickey Mouse. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and stay golden.